My name is Ilona Thompson. My platform is called Solid Exposure. I'm a writer and editor and a podcaster. I was fortunate enough to see the film that you guys have all had the opportunity to view, Andrè, the Voice of Wine, a few years ago under very special circumstances in Francis Ford Coppola office. And it feels like it happened just a few days ago. The movie had a monumental impression on me, and I feel a great deal of gratitude to our first guest, whose name is Mark Tchelistcheff. He, of course, is the great grand uncle, Andrè, that is, Mark's. There's a strong relational aspect, but Mark approached it not just from the standpoint of being his relative, but also as an artist and a storyteller. He invested a tremendous amount of time and energy. It was a decade in the making, and poured over archives, conducted a myriad of interviews, and had gotten to know his great grand uncle from a variety of perspectives, from third parties that had the opportunity to spend time with him. So we're fortunate recipients of that research. The movie really captures the spirit of who Andrè was. So the floor is yours, Mark.
Well, it's a great pleasure and an honor to be here on this this evening. Well, it's 1:30 in the 2 in the morning for me. I'm presently in Germany, hence the Bavarian outfit. So if I come off a little bit sleepy, I apologize. And yes, it was an amazing journey, not only in getting to know, in a way, Andrè in a different aspect than I knew him as my great uncle, because he was such a wonderful man to me, but as the winemaker and the man who influenced so many. And part of this great journey was getting to know wonderful winemakers and people. And that's what Andrè always had around him, amazing people like the ones we have today. Rob Davis over here and Greg La Follette. And they were kind enough to be part of my film, as with many other winemakers. Actually, 70% of the people I interviewed didn't make it to the cutting room floor, because I have over 300 hours of material, and had to make an hour-and-a-half film, so I can make a whole series of films actually from my materials. And it was one of the most incredible journeys of my life, but also one of the most difficult journeys of my life, shooting in different countries, trying to raise the funds on and off. From America to France to Italy to Russia and to the United Kingdom. Those were the places that I filmed. And then also spending tons of hours in the archives, in these beautiful Russian archives of 35 millimeter films, and actually getting lost in those often. But it was an amazing journey because of the people that Andrè touched, and they touched me. And I'm hoping that through the film, people get to know Andrè better. People get to feel him and his spirit. That was the main thing I wanted to really capture, was Andrè's spirit through this film, and those he touched. And that's why I did go back to Russia, because I wanted to bring in that special aspect of Andrè's heritage, our Russian heritage, into the film. Every piece of music in the film is original. I had this fantastic contemporary composer, Alexei Agi, working with me on it. And we recorded there with some of the best musicians that Moscow could provide at the time. And so I don't know if all of you have seen the film. I hope you have. If you haven't, I hope you do get to see it. And so it's a great honor to be here tonight with all of you. And I'm sure there's probably more questions and later on that I'll be happy to answer with all of you. And also I want to say it's so wonderful to see Ulysses and Malia van der Kamp with us, because they were very close with Andrè, I am still crying to this day, because that was the first day of filming. That if you saw the film where Greg is walking in the vineyards playing his beautiful bagpipes, that's in their vineyards, the Van der Kamp Vineyards, where we're drinking this wine from tonight. And unfortunately, my sound man didn't capture the sound that for most of that day. Some of the sound I was able to get because it came off the camera, but we also had a problem with, it was a brand new camera out of the box called a red camera at the time that we were shooting with, and that had problems. So, but I can't wait to be back with the Van der Kamps on that incredible magical terroir that you have, because it is. And I hope when we taste these wines, you'll see the magic of the terroir that comes through with Greg's magic of winemaking. And the last time Greg, I, and Rob were together was at Vino Vip, it was in Italy before all of this pandemic. And it was an amazing experience. It was the most important wine, let's say one of the most important wine events in Italy, VIP events, they call it Vino Vip, and Cortina. And that was really wonderful being with you guys then. And nice to be back here in this new world of ours, the new normal of Zoom or whatever else we use. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Extraordinary body of work. And to echo your sentiment, we are indeed quite fortunate to have Ulysses and Malia van der Kamp with us. So you guys, later on, you have an opportunity to ask them questions directly that have to do with the viticulture and winemaking and their experience as the growers. Our next guest is Rob Davis. 2020 would have been 44th harvest. I just want to let that sink in for a second. He retired after the 43rd. He is the only, I believe, the longest winemaker of record, the only one that with that kind of tenure. 4 decades. Wow. Same winery, Jordan Vineyards. If you haven't had their wines, highly recommended. Historic winery. So Rob is native Californian and an athlete, by the way. For those of you who are curious, he can talk about his triathlon experience. He was telling us earlier how he got a lot of exercise in today. So Rob joined Jordan in 1976. He just graduated from UC Davis with a degree in fermentation science, and essentially started working hand in hand with Andrè for consulting for Jordan almost immediately. So fortuitously, those two began their working relationship from the inception of Jordan brand. This obviously must have been somewhat intimidating for Rob at the time, because Andrè was quite well known, arguably at the time, the most well-known post-prohibition winemaker in the valley, in the Napa Valley, that is. Rob, of course, ended up spending 18 years with him, and they worked side by side and made a lot of fantastic wines together. But they also became very close friends. You really get to know people and travel with them, don't you? They traversed a lot of European countries, particularly France, and many domains and chateaus later. They discovered that they have shared many common values. They both truly and deeply believe in quality. It's a monumental commitment that they both made in their own ways. Always improving, always pushing for the better. Making balanced wines from balanced vineyards, something that doesn't get talked about nearly often. We talk about balance in the field, but the balance actually starts in the vineyard as well. And of course, what wine truly means to us as human beings. So Rob, I'm so excited to hear from you about your experience.
Thank you, Lana. And I have to say, it's obviously a pleasure to be here, and especially talk about Andrè, who defined our winemaking, defined my winemaking. And I was a graduate at UC Davis in 1976, very close to the professors, very good friends with them, still are. And many have already retired, but I was 22 when I started Jordan, and Andrè was 55 years my senior. And I never looked at him as being older than I am. He just had this youthful energy that you just loved. You know, I mean, I thought, I can't even give up with this guy. We would run through the vineyards, and he would dance. He had this great passion. But you know, I have to credit Tom Jordan for hiring him, because I never would have met him otherwise. And I planned. One of the things that I saw when I was a student at Davis was that none of the professors ever worked in the public sector. It was always research oriented. And so my plan was to get a job with a winery and then spend most of my life traveling. And then I met Andrè from day one, and I changed all those plans. And I said, this man knows more about wine than I could possibly get out of any book. So what did I learn? Here's this man that's so spiritual, so passionate, but like I said, he defined my winemaking. And in travels, I traveled to so many of the areas of France with him exclusively. But what defines me the most of Andrè in terms of winemaking was, you talked about balance, and that's what I think is so key to what I learned as a winemaker. And I think today, I'm wondering what Andrè would say. You know, he was always supportive of the Napa 10 structures. He said that was their charm. But from a winemaking point of view, he wasn't marketing that, but he was talking about how best to make wines. And I think one of my lessons I learned when I was driving the car, we're on our way to meet Didier Dagenot at Cellars in Sancerre, wonderful wines he made. And he says, you call me doctor, that's another story. Doctor, pull over. I said, okay. And so I pull the car over, and now in Europe, you don't always have to look for a restroom. You just, relieve yourself off the vineyard. So he got out of the car, and I turned my back to him, and he goes, what are you doing? I said, well, Andrè, I'm not going to watch you. And he goes, no, watch me do this. And so he crawled underneath this fence where there were vines, and he put his hand in the soil and rubbed them, and he told me to do the same thing. And he goes, smell that. And he goes, you're going to smell this in the wine you're going to taste next. And I'm going to smell dirt. And so, you don't question Andrè. Okay, well, we tested the amazing Sauvignon Blanc of Didier Dagenot of Cellars, and I could smell the alkalinity. Davis will say all day long, you can't really smell minerals. There's no real century for that. Well, I'm telling you what, I smelled that soil that Andrè had me smell. And that, from that day on, it completely changed my winemaking, where Andrè said, great wines are born in the vineyard. And so it was just customary for me always to start out the vineyard every single morning, working with the vines. And then from that point, once we got to the harvest, it was much easier because the grapes, you've been working with them all year long. But that's just one instance of Andrè teaching me, I think, one of the most important elements of winemaking. But also, his sense of humor was amazing. And, just this man itself. And I think this is what I love about the movie that Mark's made, is that I think this is the first time I've been able to see something that's not, to feel Andrè's presence, you really have to be standing across from him. I mean, I have so many memories where he was very punctual, would show up at Jordan 9 o'clock. And his coffee, he says, I have to have it scalding hot. And I said, Andrè, how do you get your lips around this? This is burning, because I had to be fresh. And I had to be literally coming out where it's really hot. And he said, from where, if you grew up where I did, you would appreciate hot things. So, that reflected his experience of growing up in Russia, and then, the cold winters there, which actually he loved. And then, he'd smoke, which was kind of forbidden if you think you're going to get a century, but he'd go through at least 2 Carlton cigarettes and tell about the local gossip, what's going on in Apple. But then he would gauge my mood, and then if I was up, he'd bring me down, and he goes, oh, I said, Andrè, everything's going great. And he said, no, my dear sir, there's a lot of problems right now. And then I go, oh, and then I'd say, oh gosh, Andrè, I got so many problems, I don't know where to start. And he'd say, my dear sir, there's always a rainbow behind the clouds, and that's what you need to look for. And that's where I think this philosophical focus of the wines. And I finally, after 4 years, I said, Andre, I think I figured it out. I said, when I'm up, you bring me down. When I'm down, you bring me up. You always want me to be balanced when I'm tasting wine so that I have a balanced approach to wine. And he looked at me, not necessarily with a grin, but saying, it took you 4 years to figure that out. So it did take me 4 years, but I think what's really key in the movie itself is just to show you the depth of what Andre brought to all of us, winemakers, people, wine growers, family members, friends, no matter what. Andre brought something very special to everyone. And this movie points that out, is that it's legacies don't give them justice, is that, and I would say there's not a glass of wine we don't drink today that is not due to Andre. I mean, literally, there's not a glass. If it went through malolactic, if it had certain fermentation qualities to it, if it has certain exposures that you can get out of the vineyards, all this is what Andre brought to the growers, the wineries, and winemakers, and throughout California, Oregon, Washington, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and then of course all through Europe. I mean, he was so profound in what he brought to all of us, and in individual ways too. He expressed his teachings and he adapted it to each person. But I think in particularly, he loved young people because there were, as he said, their minds were still loose, they're wet clay, and they're still being formed. And so we could be very, very influential in that. But and his wife, by the way, is 96 now. I still see her. We both had our shots now, so now we can visit. And she just has huge smiles when I come over to see her because, we of course talk about the old days and a lot of fun times. But I literally, Elodie said I should write a book. I think has been some interviews done on Andre. But the movie captures really, truly. I think Mark's done such a beautiful job of capturing the essence of this man, because there's so many factors that go into Andrè Tchelistcheff. When you say Andrè Tchelistcheff, there's so many things vividly that come across my mind that captures my memory of Andre. And I always tell Mark, I said, I cannot watch this movie without having tears in my eyes, because tears of joy, just to say that I've been able to have the pleasure of working with this man. 18 years, it was like nothing. It just seemed like it just went through so quickly. But every single day, I could not wait for Andre to show up. He'd show up, he'd walk in, he'd look serious at me at first, and then he'd go kiss the hands of the women, very European style, and then start discussing the issues of wine. Great time. So thank you, Mark and Greg. I know when we talked about Andre, all we can do is have this huge smile on our faces. And Ulysses and Malia, I know your parents and visiting at Andre's house. And it's not, this is classic Andre. The humility of this man cannot be emphasized enough, where in our industry, egos are not short supply. We all tend to kind of brag a little bit about our own achievements, but Andre was so humble. So you go to his house, and when the Vanderkamp were visiting, probably, I don't know if there were the Bellini parties he talked about, but always great attendance by what I call the elite of aristocracy of Napa Valley in particular, but certainly the wine industry. You had Robert Mondavi taking shots of vodka with Andre. We had, Michael Gergich, Jack Davies, Louis Martini. The list just went on. Joseph Hikes. So many I was exposed to as a young lad. It was just great. So great memories. And then again, watch the movie.
And speaking of, I know we all have been looking at you, but also there's the poster of Andrè, of course. I can tell everyone, I've been fortunate enough to visit your home. It's not there for the sake of this conversation. It has a permanent place, a centerpiece of the So I was just amazed because we met for different reasons that's unrelated directly to Andre, even though he's present in every conversation. Let's just say that. I immediately went, visually, and we started the conversation. It's like he was a part of it. So he's a part of your world on a daily basis, isn't he?
Yes.
Wow. We'll definitely come back to the wine segment of our conversation, but just really even looking in your eyes as you were speaking, that spirit of Andre, it clearly lives on in you. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Yes. Our next guest is Greg Follette. You guys, probably most of you know him quite well. So if what I next will forgive me, I think it bears repeating. I certainly don't tire talking about him. He's a remarkable man. Some of you know that his background actually was in the seminary and in biochemistry. He was working, he actually had a degree in plant biology and chemistry and was working on AIDS research in UC Davis, and subsequently earned his master's degree in food science and technology at UC Davis. So I'm sorry, the first one was UC San Francisco, pardon me. So in 91, Greg started working at Pinot, where of course he met Andre and was mentored by him. We had a lot in common because of this intense science background, but what they talked about the most was the artistry, the soul of wine. In fact, one of the quotes that Greg shared frequently is that winemakers should wear wine. Always see him wearing overalls. Not a coincidence. Inspired by Andre. The winemaker should wear his work. One of the first things he told me when I asked him about the overalls. Greg is not just an admirer of Andre, but he definitely is his disciple. For the last 3 decades, he focused on the credos that Andre instilled in all of his mentees. Greg has worked really all around the world. He designed and reconfigured 14 wineries. He consulted at some of the best known brands in the world. Kendall Jackson, you guys heard of La Crema and Hartford Court. He started Flowers, subsequently became a cult brand, one of the first Pinots that I've tasted. I'm impressed by that, got me falling in love with the varietal. Deloach, of course, he founded Tandem. He founded his namesake La Follette wines, and most recently, of course, Alquimista Cellars and the brand called Marshall. We haven't talked about yet, but we will. What's interesting about Greg is that he's considered a winemaker's winemaker. His colleagues that always seek his advice. He always has time for consumers. He spends a lot of time with people that come up to the winery and taste with him. He's really, despite being very sought after, he's very accessible, which I always appreciated. I learned a lot from him myself. There's no shortage of awards, notches on his belt, so to speak, international, from various publications such as Wine Enthusiast, Wine Spectator. He made some of the most heralded Pinots and Chardonnays. Wine of the Year, Mondial de Pinot, 20 most admired winemakers. It can go on. And yet he's one of the most down-to-earth people you'll ever meet. He has a lot of interests and passions when it comes to winemaking. To me, the hallmark has always been his obsessive quest, solving the mysteries of texture, the textural element, mouthfeel, as it's commonly referred to. Pinot, as we all know, is quite a capricious, very variety. So to achieve apogee in that context takes a tremendous amount of know-how, but also a soul of an artist. And Greg certainly fits that description. So Greg, talk to us about Andre and what your relationship was like.
Well, first I want to say thanks to everyone for being here. I see so many faces of folks that I've been tasting with and have come to know. And I just want to thank you for being here and for supporting Alquimista. I first met Andrè in 1987 and was invited to go to his house for a scholarship lunch that Dorothy cooked. And that's where I first got to meet Andrè. And I met him on the same day that I met another very whiz-bang, high-end, high-energy winemaker who I met him in the evening. I met Andrè during the day. And the two meetings couldn't have been any different because Andrè really was a humble guy, but really filled with power. And when I started working with him, I don't think that this made it as a cut into the movie, but there was one particular day where Andrè, I was doing this project called Great Cabernets of the World. And so we had all the top winemakers from the Napa Valley all sitting there around a table and tasting with us. And I was handing out all these forms about how structurally they could disassemble the wine, and we can take a look at different techniques in production. And Andrè, in front of everyone, basically just banged on. He said, "You should go back to UC Davis. You have no business being here as a winemaker, and you'll never be a good winemaker." And I was absolutely mortified about this. But when he had dinner with my parents down in LA, he basically said, "You know, Greg is such a pain in the ass." He didn't use that word exactly, but he said he's very demanding and he's always asking questions, always questions. And nothing ever seems to be good enough. He said, but you know, he'll make a good winemaker. And my parents really loved that. And they loved the fact that Andrè said that to them. And as my father was very close to passing, he and I remembered those words together. So Andrè meant so much to me and my formation. I could have gone down more of this wonky academic thing, but Andrè, with his power and even in that chastisement, really showed me that you had to follow the soul of wine. And I think Rob said it very well. So I'll just end it with that story about Andrè.
Wow. You obviously have, both of you have very intimate relationship with Andrè, and remember him as a person that spoke his mind, that spoke his heart, that made everyone feel special in a way. And I really loved your story, Rob, about the human balance. Again, we talked about the bottle, the vineyard, but it really starts with a person that touches the land. And if that person is balanced, then what ensues will be that way as well. And I certainly have seen that quality in you, Greg. I didn't realize it came from Andrè, but I think he might have had something to do with it.
Yes.
Andrè always spoke about that, you know, the winemaker is in his wine. And if you, this is one of the things, if you have an aggressive wine, perhaps that day that winemaker was feeling aggressive. If you have a gentle wine, and he always said, you know, the winemakers also, it comes from the terroir, but they imbue that wine from their person into that wine. And so these beautiful wines that both of you made and continue to make are just lovely. I mean, I don't get to drink enough of both of your wines. It's just really sad.
When you come back from Berlin, I'm going to ship some wines down to your parents in Florida, and we'll make sure that you've got plenty of bottles to bring with corks to pull.
Don't have to go to the Suez Canal, though, okay?
Yes.
Right. Yep.
Indeed, Andrew's nickname was Maestro. And of course, that could be interpreted as a conductor. Not only he conducted the grapes, the vines, but he also was a conductor of humans. And what you described fits that so well. We now come to the exciting part of tasting the wines together. Of course, it comes from the Kamp Vineyard, Greg will take the reins and walk us through the tasting. You're welcome to ask questions and share notes and impressions as we go along. Greg?
Okay, so the first wine that we're going to taste, everyone, if you got your glasses prepared, is the 2017 Pinot Meunier from the Kamp Vineyard. And the Kamp Vineyard was very special to Andrè, not just because it was a great vineyard site, which it is and continues to be now under the works of Ulysses and his sister Malia, but also they raised chickens. And a lot of people don't know that André's first book that he wrote was about poultry raising. And so when Andrè would come up to the Kamp Vineyard, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ulysses, but I suspect that they'll talk more about chickens than they probably would wine.
Absolutely, yeah. No, my father had a pretty unique relationship with Andrè. Nobody else had a chicken relationship with him except my father. So, yes.
Yep. And so 2017 is a good vintage to start with. We've got two 2017s, the other being a Pinot. But 2017 was also a big fire year, and this wine, the grapes were actually picked, if I recall correctly, the day before the fires actually semicircled your guys' vineyard. And if you want to go onto the Alquimista website, I have a blog there about transformation that really speaks to what it's like to pick in the Kamp Vineyard, and that's really touches the spirit of Andrè quite a bit. And by the way, Andrè is also godfather to one of Martin's kids too, so that's their special relationship. So the 17 is a little bit lighter in color. This is done 100% whole cluster, fully carbonic maceration, which means that instead of in one vat with one fermentation, you have tens of thousands of individual fermentations, because every single berry becomes its own individual fermentation vessel, and you can't pull it apart from the cluster. Otherwise, you won't get that interior enzymatic fermentation. So what we do is we load up the fermenter, we put it in the back of my bullet-riddled pickup truck and point the nose up to the top of Sonoma Mountain, and the people who pick that are pretty much my family and the Kamp family, and the people who live there on the property and work on the property. And I also see Jesus is here. He's helped to pick too. Thank you, Jesus. And so what we do is with the whole cluster, you clip the cluster and then you carry it gently while singing, and then deposit it into the fermenter. Not really. You put it into a 45-pound lug box, and then Malia Matcha kind of lifts it up and puts it in about 120 times or something like that. And so while it's going in, I'm throwing in chips of dry ice to keep it anaerobic, and then we seal it up and drive it back down. I don't know any other winery that actually brings the fermenter into the vineyard among the vine rows, has just the families picking it. I mean, this is really a labor of love. This wine is intensely done with love and care. And then for a whole month, it's treaded. You step on it, and I can see that some folks here that are watching have actually done some of that treading, and you know who you are. In fact, my kids, they grew up having to work in the vineyard and winery, and they scrubbed way too many barrels and tanks, but the only job that they fought to do was treading the Pinot Meunier. And so this mostly is my son's feat. The year before was Malia, was the intern helping to make wines there. Unfortunately, we ran out of the 2016 Pinot Noir. We were going to use that, but it's all sold out now. So this wine has an ebullience to it from the carbonic maceration. And if you'll taste it on the palate, on the late palate, it has a lot of raspberry, which is again an echo of that carbonic maceration. So anyone have any questions now about the wine, or questions of Ulysses or Malia about the vineyard or this particular wine?
I have to say, it's just so elegant. It's just, Andre would love this because he loves these elegant wines, but it's seamless too, from beginning to smell it all the way through the palate into the finish. There's no interruption. It's just really just so well balanced. This is a very much a lifelong Andre wine.
I think you would have liked this very much. One of my jobs, working with Andre, I was doing the experimental winemaking in what was called the clone room. And so Andre and I worked very closely on all kinds of experimentations. And the great thing about Andre was he never really was satisfied. He's always looking for more things, more questions. And at one point, he actually had me go back into the archives of Connaissance du Vin and find a 1957 article that Maynard Amarine and Roubrou-Gaillon jointly did when Maynard was doing a sabbatical at the University of Burgundy. And he had me look that up and say, lactic acid esters. This is one of the keys to longevity. And he felt that most winemaking was not geared towards longevity anymore. But I think that he would have really liked this wine. Thank you, Rob.
And I think too, he always promoted acidity, which is not being promoted well today. And that really is the life of those, holds the life of those wines so well. And for this to be a 2017 is remarkable because I remember October 7th is when we had the fires here. It was devastating. You know, you just prayed that you were finished by then. So you got it in the day before?
I think it was October 6th. Is that right?
Yes, October 6th. Yes, you did well, Mike. He says you did well, my dear sir.
And he did say, "My dear sir," too.
Hey, there are a few questions. So,
okay.
One was besides BV wines, what did Andre like to drink? And I'll leave it up to whoever can answer that from the panel.
Well, Pinot was his favorite varietal, but I think Rob spent more time internationally with him. So what did he like to drink when you guys were on the road, Rob?
Well, I mean, I can't help but mention when on the bleeding parties, he was very fond of vodka. About the only time I ever drank it. And it was always these little, it always started with a salute to the chef and then his wife and to the beautiful women here. He was a smoothie. But you're right. Pinot Noir was undoubtedly I think it was partly his favorite because from a winemaking crafting point of view, it was most challenging. It was wrought with a number of issues, and he said, "My soul suffered making this wine," and I could just see him implore himself to try to figure out for the vineyard. I know that he felt like in his 44, I believe, it was his favorite. And then he says
46.
46, and then he says, then Madame de Pads made him pull the vineyard. And he says, "Andre, I'm not paying you to grow leaves," but it was such a small production. But I think that year he particularly did it. You're right, Mark, 46. But yeah, it was. I think it's a challenge to anybody. If that varietal, there's just so many things going against it. But I just love the way Andre said, you defines a great Pinot Noir where you take a Lincoln rose and you place it, you go into your garden, which he had, and you take a Lincoln rose, pick it, and you put it in your vase, and 3 days later you smell it, and that's what you want to smell in Pinot Noir is the dying rose. And I just, you can look, and you mentioned going into Amarine's old, and particularly Pascal Rubric all working together, but nobody comes up with a description like Andre. I mean, you just, this poetry, you just feel it, when he describes something so well. A lot of the description I couldn't repeat here, but like I said, this wine we're tasting it just captures kind of not trying to overdo it, Greg. You didn't try to make something it didn't want to be. That's what Andre taught us.
Yes. Make every wine what it wants to be, nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this question is probably for either Malia or Ulysses. It says, why is Pinot Meunier planted there? And what was the decision process for selecting Meunier versus Pinot Noir for both planting and winemaking?
Well, our father was making sparkling wine at the time. So it was called Vanderkamp Champagne before the law against using champagne. So he made wine from this vineyard from the 60s, 70s, 80s. And then we ended up acquiring the vineyard in 89. And we're doing some replants. And actually, Andrè was a pivotal part of that. He was, you know, really close to our father. And there at the time was a number of other varietals planted here. There was some like Golden Chasselas and Chardonnay and Cab and Mission, all kinds of random stuff. And he was one that really said that this site screamed for Pinot Noir specifically and Pinot Meunier. So now we only have those two varietals planted.
Yeah, initially we were looking just to serve our needs as champagne producers, and so we had Chardonnay, Pinot Meunier, and Pinot Noir, and it wasn't until we got out of the champagne business that we discovered people like Greg LaFollette in this underground, this huge underground, network of Pinot Noir enthusiasts that we didn't know existed before when we were in the champagne business. So.
Another Andrè-ism that my dad repeats a lot that was kind of like what you said, Rob, was apparently he would always tell my dad that Pinot should smell like a beautiful woman in a fur coat on a cold night.
Oh, well, that was, yes, I was not going to, only you can repeat that. He could describe a Chardonnay that smells like the breast of a young woman wrapped in fur.
I'd like to add something about the Pinot Meunier. Somebody asked the question about our decision to plant, and this is going back over 30 years now. Initially, we took our hottest location and planted our Pinot Meunier there, and it suffered terribly. And it took us a long time to learn how to crop it and how to grow it, and we had a lot of problems. And now it's in our coolest location, and Greg actually takes the lot that's the most delicate and the most gentle and the most protected by the redwoods and the longest hang time, and it is the most temperamental, and we need to thin it more than anything so that it all ripens evenly. So it's been a 30 some odd year quest to learn how to grow this grape.
Well, you're doing it beautifully. All I can say, it's that terroir comes through in your wine, Greg, and how you're taking care of your land there. Andrè would be so proud of you. I'm no doubt about that. And one more quote about also the smell. If you look at the smell of the Pinot Noir, it's if you take a lady's leather hand glove off and smell her hand, that's how a great Pinot Noir should smell. What's that mix
Exactly.
of the sweat of the woman and then that leather glove. And if you smell some of like even the Pinot Meunier has a little bit of that. Mm-hmm. It's lovely, just lovely. And those descriptors. And Rob, going back to you, you might be interested in this. Do you know that Andrè said he had two favorite Pinots, the 1946 and half of 1947? This might, Ulysses, you might know this story. Does anybody know the answer? Why?
Well, he probably pulled it at that point. But what?
So in 1946, he did it all himself. He loved it, and then Amarine, Andrè, as you know, and both of you can talk about this, Andrè was always willing to try something new or to see how it would work. And Amarine said, oh, I have a great new refining, gelatin refining. And Andrè was doing egg white refining with his Pinot. And so he took half of his 47 Pinot and did gelatin and half with egg white, and he really didn't like the gelatin.
Yes.
And so, and that's kind of, if you ever get, try, I've been lucky enough to try some of the 46, and I tried a 47, and I think one of the 47s I had was a gelatin, and it was dead, but the 46 was still living and lovely and beautiful. But what you're doing with your vineyards, I mean, That's such a special place too. And I think it's an incredible vortex in this world where you get to live.
Yeah. So
I have one Andrè quote if I can. Can
Yeah.
you hear me?
Yep.
So I was a young lad when I first met Andrè, and I knew he was a great man, and I was always on my best behavior. We were all on our best behavior, but there was one thing he said to me personally that I don't think he said to any other human being on earth. And I was just a young guy, and he was a small guy himself, and he had a ton of charisma, and but I felt he was looking down to me, even though I was probably taller than him. And he said, "Sonny, as long as you keep a first name relationship with these grapevines, you'll do just fine." And that's a direct quote from Andrè.
I can hear him say.
I to really have a hands-on relationship with these grapevines.
I can hear him say that. Yes.
Yeah. Another question really towards Rob and Greg was, this is from a person who's seen Mark's film 7 times. But he goes, one of André's greatest legacies was role as a teacher. What was the greatest lesson you learned for Greg and Rob?
Greg, why don't you start?
Yeah, Andrè was close to the end when I first started working with him. And one of the things he was really particular about was actually relationships and relationships with your family. And one thing he told me in all seriousness was, don't let your passion for wine ruin your family. And I think that was an extraordinary thing for a man like Andrè to say. But I really tried to take that to heart through all of my years. And his concern for me as a human being transcended my ability to make good wine. And I think that's the most valuable. I mean, he gave me lots of great wine information and value, but the most valuable comment, I think, was that one that actually didn't have anything to do with the winemaking itself.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I commented before, I think in the book, Dr. Richard Peterson talks about how Andrè really was not a winemaker. He was more correctly a wine grower, because where he spent so much time in the vineyard and saying that, that's where the great wines are made. But there's one anecdote that you remind me of, particularly we talk about families, but also he could distill down something complex into such simple terms, which is a wonderful asset for a teacher, because wine is so complex and grape growing is even more complex. So I was a few days before harvest, and Andrè and I were walking through the vineyard, and I was tasting the fruit. And I said, gosh, he says, you look troubled, my dear sir. I said, Andrè, I'm not good. We've had this heat, and the vines have not recovered yet. So I want to give them time to do that, as they draw more water back in and fill out the clusters. And I said, I'd like to do that, but then we have rain in the forecast. And he looked at me, instead of giving me the answer, he put his arm around me and said, my dear sir, you forget, wine is a marriage of simple pleasures. Just remember that. And I was like, I'm overthinking the problem. And all of a sudden, it's like I just need to look today what's going on. But wine is a marriage of simple pleasures. We don't overthink it. It's just a glorious, this delicious, what I'm drinking now, this marriage of simple pleasures. Well done, Greg.
Well, Pinot Meunier certainly spurred some robust discussion. And just to highlight one more time that this is not a varietal that's typically is made as a still wine, let alone with carbonic maceration. So that alone is a curiosity, and it certainly is delicious. So what are we tasting next, Greg?
The 2018, and if people have 2 glasses, it would be instructive to put both in, but the 2018 has more floral aspect to it. It has a little bit more ebulliency coming out of the nose, and if you taste it on the back palate, it has an even deeper sense of that kind of raspberry ketone. And one of the things that I can smell off of this is that rose petal aspect. And there is actually a chemical and explanation for that, which I'm sure Rob knows. But that is the smell of rose petals, whether they're 3 days old and dying or whatever. But that smell is called 4-ethylphenethanol. And that is a smell that you get when you don't add a lot of yeast food and you really force the yeast to consume all of their nutritional supplements that are in there and not just the easy stuff. And that's because yeast will consume first free nitrogen, which is like ammonia, and then they'll start eating their amino acids. And the first amino acid they'll eat is alanine. The last one they'll eat, only when there's no other nitrogen source left, is phenylalanine. And they'll chop off that phenyl group, which is a benzene ring, and substitute it to make it, to detoxify it, to 4-ethylphenethanol, the smell of rose petals. That is a yeast stress aroma. And you can only really get that consistently when you partner with the yeast and ask them to do just a little bit more.
I think that the carbonic also accentuates that, don't you think?
Yes.
Because you lose it so easily in a hot fermentation, but our carbonic just kind of protects that and kind of puts a jacket around it. And this is what I get out of it, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, Greg, so there is a, and maybe for others, there is a question regarding, in terms of what Andrè thought was the best Pinot clone for Carneros.
He never was able to answer that. And at the time of his death, the Friday before he went into the hospital, never to return, he was so sick that he couldn't come to the winery. So I had to go to his house. He was so sick, he could not even go to the toilet by himself, but he could raise a glass of Pinot Noir to his nose. And this was his last day of work on a Friday. And I was tasting with him 16 Pinot Noir clones with him on that day. He was working, I mean, he died with his boots on. And we still didn't get the right answer. And maybe we won't.
You know, one of the last things when he was at Queen Valley there, and he looked at me and he goes, why do you look so down? And I said, gosh, Andrè, the prognosis doesn't seem very good. You're right. And he was very sick. And I said, well, it doesn't sound good. He goes, yes, I don't know whether I have, and I said this in the movie, I said, I don't know whether I have 2 days left, 2 weeks, or even 2 minutes, but we still don't know the right root stock for Pinot Noir and Carneros. We need to be working on that. And wow, and that was, his love of wine, and particularly the vines, it never ended. And I think clones, was probably the next step he was working on with you, which, what a palate. Greg, you must just, what we would both give just to have a continued meeting with him and just to be exposed to all that tremendous knowledge. But again, the humility that comes through too. He never tried to upstage either one of us. It was like, I just want to learn along with you. Isn't that great?
Absolutely. That's perfectly said.
Who do you get?
Yeah, the 18 even has more fruit. I get, there's just, and it just continues to ooze out of the glass. It's just wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, good year.
Yep.
So what do you guys think of the wine? Anybody has any comments on the flavor profile?
Well, let's move on to the Pinot Noir, which was André's favorite varietal. And this is the 2017, which also a fire year. And this particular Pinot Noir contains 8% Pinot Meunier, blended in right before bottling. So this is done more traditionally. There was no whole cluster in this particular wine. We had a pretty intense hot spell in 2017. We had several days of very hot temperatures down in the valley. It was 112, 114. It didn't quite get that hot up there, but I was really worried that we were going to have to pick a little too early, but the vines recovered. I'm not sure what you did, Ulysses, but you were able to coax them along for another 2 or 3 weeks after that.
Wow.
What did you do?
I've got a lot of faith in these grapevines. We've got a relationship that's been going on over 30 years. So, we trust in one another.
That
How
sounds
did
very
you, if I
fun.
could ask, how did you work the leafing? I mean, it was the hottest year outside of 1996 I can remember. We had heat spell after heat spell after heat spell. And then we remember, Greg, we went into Labor Day weekend, and at least here it was 114 degrees. I remember, I'm a big Giants fan, so one of my friends, the broadcaster for the Giants, I was listening to the radio, I was going to check on some Chardonnay, and they said, first pitch, 7:05, 102 degrees. That's San Francisco. That's cold San Francisco. So, and then, remember after that heat spell Labor Day, then it rained, and then it got over 100 degrees again. And weird, strangest news. How you pulled off the delicacy of these wines is a good tribute to you.
Well, a lot of it has to do with, in fact, pretty much all of it has to do with the way Ulysses farms. So if you go up to the vineyard, and I hope that people can get a chance to go up there and see this remarkable place, but if it's north and south, and the south side, it just has this great leaf cover. It's almost like a ballerina-like, and the north side is pretty clean. And I think this is how Ulysses is able to just maintain this level of delicacy. And any thoughts on that kind of leafing, Ulysses and Malia?
I call the system divine. One side looks as wild as it could possibly be with sloppy tucking, and the other side is as clean as you could possibly imagine, where you could count every cluster and see every berry. And what that gives me is the dappled light effect. And nobody ever taught me this. It was trial and error, just the hard way. How can you high grade, manipulate a crop and still protect it at the same time? So it's every grape grower has to find a way to manage their crop. And I once read an article about canopy management, and I realized that 10 different growers had 10 different ideas. And I was no different. I had a very specific idea that worked for me here. And we had failed miserably a decade prior to this.
So I just technical question for you. So how do the winds work there? Do they come in at night and kind of swoop in and kind of cool the vines off, or do you get hardly any breeze at all?
Yeah, we're up at the top of the mountain, so we're actually a pretty windy site, and we're Meuniers, but we're just around the corner from Petaluma Gap, so we really get those coastal winds kind of ripping around the side of the mountain and cooling us down from the west usually. So it keeps temperatures down up here.
I think it also delays maturity for us too, because being high up on a mountain, when the wind speed gets up 30 miles per hour or so, the stoma start to close and respiration goes down. And I think the wind really delays maturity. So many different facets here. We're a north-facing bench, so our soils are really cool. Yeah.
Sounds like a great
I have
place
a
to live.
question for
Greg, you and I get our
Vander
sleeping
Kamps.
bag and go stay there.
Okay.
How did your folks originally decide on that amazing piece of property?
Well, our father and Ulysses grew up looking down at this property, just up a little bit higher on Sonoma Mountain with the view of this property. And my dad bought the grapes from this vineyard and made wine and really fell in love with it for decades and became friends with the old man who tended it. And Ulysses would watch the old man working in the vineyard, and the house ended up burning down, and he just kind of passed it on to us.
Yeah, it was the former Cundiff Ranch, and in its glory, it was a magnificent place, just like it is today. But things went into disrepair. The old man got old, and things fell apart. And we've spent our entire lives resurrecting the farm. And I think today it's as nice as it used to be at the turn of the century.
Hope we got pictures the way it used to be to show how far it came. So.
It really hasn't changed a bit. We didn't change the land. We didn't change the footprint one bit. Didn't add any buildings. We didn't take anything away. We just brought it back to life.
Excellent.
There was a question on how is 2021 looking?
Oh boy.
Well, there's the drought years are definitely, it's an advantage to the winemakers. Usually we produce some pretty good wines in the drought years, but this is going to be the driest year of my life. It hasn't been as dry since the 70s. We've had 12 inches of rain up on the mountain this year. I'm not anticipating any more. The driest year I have on record since I've been managing this vineyard is 17 inches. So it's significantly less. And I'm worried about an early fire season, and I'm worried about water stress. So
Yes.
are
you on-
these are
are you
things
on
I've
wells
thought
there?
about now for, go on.
Are you on wells for your water? Or do you have like a reservoir?
Oh, we have artesian springs on the property, so we do have our own water source, but it's still limited, and you know, the aquifer can get depleted.
Yeah, the truth is that we have this magnificent little spring here, and that's what.
Oops.
I think we lost them.
Uh-oh.
Oh, while we're bringing them back, I just want to let everybody know. I mean, obviously, there's a group of consumers that are big supporters of Greg's work. Unfortunately, members of the media, my colleagues, often do what I call throwing baby with the bathwater. They branded 2017 vintage as fire year and all kinds of challenges, things that happened. So it's not labeled accordingly. As you can clearly tell, here from the sources, from the growers, from the winemakers, it's highly individualized. So following the brands that do right by their land, by the vineyard, that invested their entire lives and really pays off. You can have the most profound wines from some of the challenging years. So the teachable moment here is do your research, do your homework, pay attention. You can do so much better if you do. While we're waiting for Ulysses and we'll come back, hopefully we'll get him back. It's such a bonus to
I
have.
think they're on.
Oh,
Yeah.
excellent.
I was just talking about water before we lost connection there, and all I was going to say is that we have this magical spring here. The Native Americans first settled this land because of this artesian spring, and later the white man needed a quality source of water that could be gravity fed to their house before electricity. So we've got this little spring, and if we had it provides us with just enough water, and if we had a deep well, we would probably be using more water than we really needed. And I think that this small spring has caused us to have to really learn to use water really judiciously and treat it as precious, and to more grow vines that have a symbiotic relationship with their environment than with the supplemental water we're giving them. So it's a big part of our philosophy, I think, is just sort of a sustainable farming.
And as Ulysses said, the water feeds all of our houses and our garden and everything else as well. So it's a very closed ecosystem here, where we have to think about how everything interacts, and you know, how we live to make sure the grapevines get some water too.
We've already discussed water rationing in the short term, so that we have enough irrigation water for later this fall. So. Yeah.
We might not shower.
We're not going to plant 2 gardens. We're only planting 1 garden this year.
Yeah, this is a question for Mark, and it is like what years were you able to spend with Andrè?
I mean, I spent, I grew up a lot overseas, but every time we'd come back, Andrè was very much like a grandfather to me. My grandmother and grandfather, they separated, so there was a kind of a family quarrel there. So I ended up spending, in a way, a lot more time with Andrè than my own grandfather. So as a child, you know, I used to do what Andre did is at these parties, I would also sometimes go and I'd finish off all the champagne glasses and whatever, all vodka, whatever was there. And, you know, I really enjoyed that. And, but Andre was such a great storyteller and he was so good with children. You probably remember this, Ulysses. I mean, he could just tell these amazing stories, and I was always interested in history, so I was always interested in family history. So he would tell me these amazing stories about his childhood and how he grew up and what it was like to be in Moscow, what it was like to be on our estate. We had on the estate 500 borzoi hunting dogs, and we had wolfhounds, we had horses. I mean, it was an amazing and he and his siblings, they always had these governesses, and one was a German governess, and she was very mean, or they were very mean, one of the two, I don't know, but at one point they tied her up and lit her on fire so she'd leave. So and then another time, they took one of their friends and dunked him and held him underwater. I mean, Andre had also this incredible sense of humor, and he had a wicked practical joker with some of us. And what's very interesting is the facets of Andre, like a diamond. Like one person would see one side, another person would see another side, but sometimes people wouldn't see the other sides of him and his knowledge. Like you said about the chicken farming, and in my film you'll see original films of Andre that Andre made of Dimitri running around these chickens in the film. So he had a chicken farm for a short while, but the chicken feed was so expensive during the Second World War that it was costing more for the chicken feed than he was getting from his chickens. So he ended up giving that up, and then he started the lab. But his knowledge of not only history, of philosophy, of mathematics and science was vast, and his language skills. So he was just such a beautiful man just to be with, and always he would egg me on, and he would get me in trouble with my parents. And we had this lazy Susan in our house, and he would come, and it didn't matter what was on it. He just left to spin it and everything would fly off of it. He had this lovely just childness about him. And my mother's mother knew him in Russia before the revolution as well. And they both had this sense, and she always talked about, keep your back straight and keep that child alive in you. And he had this, he kept that sense of that curiosity and that childness in him, and just that joy of the youth. And I think sometimes he was younger than the people that he was with in his mind.
Yes.
You can probably speak on that. And so I got to spend a lot of time with him. And actually, I ended up not interviewing myself in the film because I wanted it to be about the people that he really influenced, these winemakers. And I felt I needed to keep myself separate from that. I had so many people saying, oh, you'll sell the film more if it's that journey, like My Architect, where you're trying to find your great uncle. Well, I didn't want that. And I actually found out about his death because I had been about 3 months in a cave doing meditation in the Himalayas. And I came out of that cave, and the first thing I wanted to do was some really nice scrambled eggs. And I went down to this little town of Sikkim called Gangtok. It's a tiny town there in Sikkim. And I went to this it's an old British station there. And there was an old bed and breakfast. And I went and I had my bacon and eggs. And there was, the Time magazine. And I was looking through it, and there was his obituary. So then I found out that he had passed away, and I missed everything. So because I obviously was in no contact except with the people feeding through a hole in a cave. So it was devastating for me, but I think he would have enjoyed the fact that, you know, I wanted a drink and some eggs after I got out of my meditation cave. My desires didn't end, and nor has it ended here, because I still love the wine.
So
There you go.
this might be a question for Rob, but what was André's appreciation for Cabernet Sauvignon?
Well, that was his signature wine. His flagship was Moët Vineyard Private Reserve Cabernet. And actually, so many other winemakers followed his coopering. He had 100% American oak for that wine, and actually was the 68 Moët Vineyard Private Reserve that Tom Jordan, who was very much a Bordeaux, strong opinion toward Bordeaux, pretty much that's all he drunk. And it was Ernie's restaurant, I think it was, where when the sommeliers go, Mr. Jordan, you're always drinking Bordeaux, so why don't you try this California wine? And he had it. Oh my God, it was the first discovery of how great Cabernet could be in California. So we were, we're very much a Francophile ownership with the Jordans, but then André was made his Moët Vineyard Private Reserve, his signature was American oak. This was even before Silver Oak used that very much in their blend. So I asked André, I said, so you really, really like American oak for Cabernet? And he goes, no, I know, French oak. I prefer French oak. And I said, but years, the Moët Vineyard Private Reserve has always been 100% American oak. And he says, because the owners were too damn cheap. Well, it's even today, you've got French oak at least 2 to 3 times more expensive than American oak. And today, Moët Vineyard does use 100% French oak, and we moved to French oak as well while I was at Jordan. And I did taste, André, it was mentioned before, he did a lot of experimentation. I think Greg pointed that out. Love constantly, I think, again, why you like being around young people, because they had new ideas, and you love the new ideas and exploration of that. So when, I think he kind of snuck it in the budget, but he had 6 barrels of the 68 Moët Vineyards aged in French oak, which I got to try, and it was amazing wine. But that was, I think Cabernet really kind of defined his artistic pursuit was always Pinot Noir, but it was Cabernet, I think, that defined his reputation.
Wow, great question. I want to go back to what Mark has said, a little bit to piggyback on that. Childhood, where he came from. He obviously came from a life of privilege once upon a time. And I just want us all to think about for a moment what it was like. I mean, the prank sounds a little dangerous, but beyond that, living that kind of a lifestyle when you have 500 borzoi running around in towns and having that carefree with the curious life. In the process of discussion, there were such juicy metaphors, that he used for wine descriptors, such as the woman wrapped in fur in cold weather. And remember, back in Russia, cold weather, fur was a symbol of luxury, of elegance, of something so elevated. He brought that in his mind, and he was using it as descriptors. The woman's elegant hand and the leather glove. It's very unique. It's a mindset. It's the way he related to the world. And yet, one day it was all ripped away, very violent. You remember the moment in the film when their dogs were being hung in the trees. Imagine actually witnessing that. And the horror, fleeing and being left for dead. He could have become a very bitter person and nobody would have blamed him. And the truth is that he didn't. From everything we've learned, he was so optimistic and so positive and so generous and so loving. And I think that's one of the things that all of us can take away and think about in our moments of sorrow and despair. What this man has been through is extraordinary. He came to Napa in 38, and so he was in his 30s. So the fact that he dedicated 50 some odd years, 5 decades, to our industry is remarkable, that we had this gift for 5 decades. And we can certainly talk about how he revolutionized cultural practices, cellar practices. You guys talked about barrels. There was no such thing as French barriques before he showed up. So, and it was an uphill battle to implement that because of the cheapness of the owners. Something as basic as cleanliness practices. I mean, again, it sounds, you know, simple, but it's crucial, and it didn't exist when he came. Matching the right varietals to the correct soils that he was still agonizing over in his deathbed. How remarkable is that? It was always about quality. It was always about integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And how many generations of winemakers, like 3 generations roughly, that would have grown up, at least having heard of him, and some lucky recipients in first person of his mentorship. How many people has he influenced exponentially? It's really quite something to think about. This diminutive man that was such a giant of spirit, that everything he touched somehow became transformed. He was a humanist first and foremost. To him, wine was part of humanity. It wasn't just fermented grape juice that was elevated into a beautiful beverage. It was very much alive. I think we were talking earlier before the broadcast started about a wind chime, and hoping maybe it was Andrè, his spirit, that's with us at this moment. I would like to think so. And I'm wondering in my mind what he would have thought if he were to look at the wine country today. Now, Napa alone went from a handful of wineries to 660, overwhelming, right? And that's just Monroe Valley. So a lot has changed, but some things haven't. And it's those classic timeless values that he embodies that at the end of the day matter most. And we're so fortunate that he showed and lived by example of what that means. And that is a huge way, and that's what makes his spirit immortal. Thank you for joining us. Great to be with you.
Thank you. I guess, we all, Greg, are you making some final comments, and Rob and
I think a lot has been said, and we really appreciate your beautiful film.
Without a doubt.
Yes. You know, and I applaud all of you watching, because history is so important to not to everything that in part of our lives, but the history of this wonderful business we are in. Andrè is a huge part of that, and for your interest to show why you want to learn more about Andrè Tchelistcheff, all you have to do is taste these wines, you learn about Andrè. But he has affected really internationally, domestically, wines of the world. I mean, as you point out, there were 6 wineries when he came in 1938 in all of Napa. There was 124 in California when I started at Jordan, and now there's 3,500. So this business has expanded hugely, and that's just this state. But the interest level continues to explode as well. And to know where this industry is going, it's good to know where it came from. And Andrè defines that. And this movie explains it so well, so poetically, and artistically, so well done. But if you don't find yourself at least grinning or smiling at least one time or another when you watch this movie, and replay it. But it's a treasure what Mark Tchelistcheff has done for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, for all of you, and thank you everybody for being here. I mean, I think, you know, it's also the you know, everything is in that, in going back to you know, the Vanderkamps, Malia, Ulysses, your parents, and Andrè. You know, I have Dimitri, who passed away also a couple of years ago, gave me all of André's papers. I have all of his original papers. I have his briefcase. I have his notes, and I've been reading all of his notes. And he was talking about ecology and about taking care of, you know, that every one of those vines were like his babies. They were his children. And he cared about the ecology, and that's what you're doing, and that's what you carry on in your vineyard, and in the winemaking. That's what you, both of you as winemakers, and if you meet any of the other winemakers, when they all get together, it's like a family, because they're all these amazing people who have this love and this incredible passion. And that was one of the things I hoped that would come through the film, was that passion that Andrè had, and that also, it's okay to be a fine person in life, and to share, and not just to take, but to give, and this is part of it. Maybe it's also, my ideas in life, and having grown up in various countries. I was born in an Islamic country. My first schooling was in a Jewish school in Israel, in Hebrew, and then we were in Africa. Then I was in Japan and Indonesia, and then in Thailand, and and then there was a lot of Buddhist influence in my life. Obviously, as you heard, I was in a cave, and I was practicing some Tibetan. I had some Tibetan teachers who took me in and trained me, and I taught philosophy and Tibetan Buddhism for a while as well around the world. But to me, it's about how Andrè really touched people on a very, very deep level. Even if they only met him one or two times, there was people I've met across the world that had this connection with him, and he would make people feel that way. And I hope that we all can learn from that, and that how we can live better. And you're right about the suffering, and about rising above it, and doing your best, whether you're a shoemaker or a winemaker or a doctor or whatever you do in your life, do it with passion, do it with love, and bring that out and find that joy. And obviously a lot of you have, and it's so wonderful that you're continuing to make these wines, both of you, and take care of yourselves too. Remember what Andrè said, Greg, take care. It's not just about the family, it's about you, Greg.
Yes.
Because if you're not around, you can't take care of your family. So it's about taking care of ourselves so we can take care of others too.
Yes.
I toast you, the winemakers, who give us this delicious, succulent beverage that is more than just a beverage. It's something which is so special, because every wine, there's that winemaker, and every wine is that vineyard where it comes from, that terroir, and that's what I taste in your wines, and that's what makes each of these wines special. And that's where, when you talk about the 17 and there was these fires and all that, well, that should be in that wine too.
Yes.
You talked about this, Rob and Greg, right?
I don't taste the sweat though, Greg. What happened there? It's not in the wine.
Well, we didn't have sweaty feet in the Pinot Meunier.
Yeah,
But
delicious.
but really, thank you, and also thank you for all these people who support Greg and Alquimista and your continuing winemaking, and Rob and you and my film. I really appreciate it. These wines are special.
Yeah.
Each one of these wines are special. So, I love
Cheers.
Greg's wines, and as I love Greg.
We look forward to your next project, Mark. I know that there are folks that are really excited to see what happens next. You have all this material. You mentioned the 360 hours that didn't make it to the blue screen, right? So, and all the work that you've put in. So we're all, I think, secretly hoping that there's more to come.
Well, there is. I'm working on some other wine projects, and I'm working actually on a film on some of the old cigar families. Someone asked me to make. So, and I still smoke cigars, and I hope that I was supposed to shoot last summer actually in Cuba and Nicaragua and all these other places, but that all got canceled, unfortunately. But I hope that will change. I mean, I guess I could have probably organized other people to shoot, but you know, to go back. I've been in Cuba illegally, and I'd love to go back there and to be with these people who are very special too. And you know, and it's these people who are close to what they're doing, their passion and their nature, the nature and the farmers, and making something special. My film, the cigar films, my title, working title is 300 Hands, because it takes 300 hands from the time you know, from the first person who plants that seed to the time you actually smoke your cigar. 300 hands pass for a good cigar. So anyway, and then my other wine films hopefully will come out, and I'll be making also some special, hopefully, episodes on each one of the winemakers in the future. That's what I'd like to do, but it's all about also supporting my family, which I ended up having after being in Russia. I met a Russian lady, and now we have 2 children. I have 2 young daughters, 8 and 6 years old. So they'll be waking me up in just a few hours, I think. But it's been really lovely being with everybody here in this space on the computers, and it warms my heart that at least we could do this. And you know, I really wish everybody much health and happiness and prosperity in the coming days and weeks and months and years, and really wishing everybody that you have what you want in your lives, and if you don't, go for it, find your passions, find your loves.
Wow. What a powerful sentiment that is. It's a beautiful one to end this on. We all have a mission. We have a mandate. If we haven't found it, you know, today would be a good day to start looking. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Rob. Thanks, Kevin. Great job. Learned a lot. And Ulysses and Malia, of course. I can't wait to come back. And anyone that has the opportunity from California, I urge you to contact them. It is a sacred spot, a sacred ground. You feel, you experience yourself differently when you're there in person. So I highly—
everyone's welcome. Please come up. We say this every time and people don't take us up on it.
Yeah.
So
Everyone watching is invited.
And look at the label, and you'll see there's a rooster on it, and there's a reason for that. Did we get into that? But
yeah.
It's a very, very interesting reason. And it's wonderful that there's a rooster on this label here for the Kamp Vineyard.
Yep.
I just want to say one more thing. If we all had half as much passion as Andrè, we'd be doing good.
Absolutely. Yes. Cheers to that.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks
Thank
so much.
Salud.
Salud. Спасибо большое.
Yeah, great to see you.
На здоровье.
It's almost breakfast time.
Yeah, it's almost breakfast.
Best your family, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You too. Much love to everybody.
Will
Thank you,
do.
Mark.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.